This is the third virtual chapter of the Lands, Borders, and People. Today, we'll be talking about the role of host nations, countries that become a new home for people who are forced to flee their own country. Now, at a time when human capital is considered one of the biggest resources, should refugees be seen as an asset or a liability by the host nation? Should host nation policies facilitate integration of refugees in a way that can turn refugees from an added cost to the nation to an asset that is beneficial to the economy of the country? We'll be discussing all this and more today. You know, my name is Priyali. I'm the founder ED of the Azadi Project, the collaborating partner of the Asia Society India Center on this series. I'm not going to introduce the panel again. Inakshi has done a wonderful job of already introducing them. Just want to remind everybody that the discussion is going to go on till about 6:50. We'll have a question and answer round at the end of it where you can raise your hand and I'll come to you so you can ask your question. You can also please feel free to keep your cameras on throughout the discussion or when you want to ask your question. With that, let's jump into the panel discussion. In addition to our panelists, we will be also joined by a few refugee students towards the end of the discussion, and we'll ask them questions. They can respond and they can also share their thoughts. Poongkothai, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
So you moved to India as a refugee, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you were just 3 years old. Now, your journey has been fascinating. Today, you have a presence both in India, where you currently are in Chennai, and also in Sri Lanka. And you are not just empowering the Sri Lankan community, but you're empowering communities in both countries, both in Sri Lanka and India. So just tell us a little bit about your journey and, you know, how you've kind of received from the host nation in a positive way and also given back to it.
Right. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for your interest in, joining us today, because that means that you all care about the refugee issue, and, we're very happy to be talking to all of you here today. So as all of you know, 1983, there was an ethnic riot in Sri Lanka. So our house was burned as well. I come from a political family. My grandfather is S.J.V. Chelvanayagam, who was the leader of the Tamil struggle for rights and also a member of parliament, etc. It was a government-sponsored riot. And so our family, like many other families, we sort of left thinking that we will, I was 3 years old, and my mother, she just put us on her passport, and it was a tourist visa on which we came. So, I was not, one of the refugees that had to come by boat, etc., because, but however, being a refugee coming to India, my father started this organization called Organization for Elam Refugee Rehabilitation, which has been the organization that I have worked with for 20 years now. And so this is a story that, I would like to share with you all about how, a refugee community can kind of come together. So, when after the riots and when the refugees came here, we had literally, you've been prosecuted. Most of our refugees, they were fleeing for their lives. There was army marching in, there were bombs falling. It was a terrifying situation where they literally, some of them escaped with just the clothes on their backs, and then they had to take these little fishing boats and arrive on Indian soil. And one of the most beautiful things that, our refugees will tell you is the kind of welcome that they received from the Tamil Nadu people, because as you know, we're ethnically Tamil. And so they were given the first rice by, some very, the poor Tamil villages. And after that, I think one of the most important things for us, the Sri Lankan Tamil refugees, was that we kind of, came together and we formed this organization. And it's a society, right? So it was formed as a society of refugees, by refugees, for refugees. And we started advocating our own needs. And I think that is one of the most important things for a refugee group to be able to do, because if you want help, then you have to come together as a as a unit, as a large number of people, then you have the power to be able to negotiate. The second thing that we did was that we worked with the government of Tamil Nadu and the government of India. As you know, refugees is a center subject. It is under the central government. But it's carried out by each state government. So we were able to, first thing we did was we asked for education. Rubana, I noticed that, you had also, I think, mentioned in Bangladesh that, there's this issue of education. So similarly, the first thing for refugees is, education is a big question. And we got the Tamil Nadu government to take our children into schools, into the government schools. And also refugees, they don't come with documentation, so they don't have transcripts, etc. So, the government had to then sort of put something forward to say that, tell the school principals to accept the students regardless of that. And then the next step was that we asked for college education seats, and we requested over and above the quota given to the Indian children so that you do not upset the apple cart and, cause any problem. So we were given that. So as a result, our refugees and, we have more than 5,000 graduates, who are engineers and, tech people. And post that, we were also able to get jobs. Again, I just want to clarify very quickly that, India is not, party to the Geneva Convention on Refugees. And therefore, all our groups of refugees here, whether Sri Lankan, Tibetan, Rohingya, whatever, we come under a sort of a humanitarian, we're here on humanitarian basis, right? So as a result, a lot of people pose this question to me, and I think the lady from Asia Society also just asked me to touch on this, is that, we are students, we've been allowed to get jobs on humanitarian grounds in many institutions because it is under the purview of the employer. And subsequent to this, one of the great things was that, we started working. We made our refugees kind of started working for themselves. And so we started basically training health workers, women empowerment workers, to a point where we had over 600 women self-help groups among the 1 lakh refugee population. And then we had peer counselors who lived in the refugee camps. And therefore, the amount of trauma that a refugee goes through, you don't want to have to go to a psychiatrist. Here you have the peer counselor coming to your house counseling. So like this, we basically developed our refugees into sort of resource persons where they were working for themselves. Then the next step was, you give them a sort of a sense of you need to return home because, refugees have no hope. That is the hardest thing because you're living in this, you're waiting, right, for something. You don't have roots. So you feel this kind of sense of hopelessness, and that leads to a lot of vagrancy, militancy. So many things can, go wrong in a refugee community. And so one thing that we did was we motivated them saying, okay, so you get educated and then you can go home and you can rebuild your homeland. And that is a kind of motivation that, we gave to our refugee population. Right. And a lot of them also returned home. And very quickly, the one more thing I'd like to say is that, the host community, because of how much we felt welcome in Tamil Nadu, our refugee community started working to give back. And so they were literally change makers where, during Chennai floods, our refugees went in, worked with the people, 3 crores worth of relief. We do training programs. We work in the Indian schools now where you have refugee trainers training Tamil Nadu children in government schools, etc. So I'm happy to just tell you guys that, refugees do not have to be helpless. Right? That's a wonderful thing. If you empower them and you skill them and you accept them and treat them with dignity, they can be a catalyst for change and change makers in your own nation. So, yeah, thank you.
That's a great way of putting everything and all the great arc of your story and of Sri Lankan refugees in India in a short capsule. Rubana, I'm going to come to you at this point. While this situation sounds in many ways very ideal, that a lot of the Sri Lankan refugees in India could access education, could access livelihood opportunities, could become catalysts of change and give back. We're talking about smaller numbers as compared to the numbers that the country of Bangladesh is seeing right now. In Bangladesh, we're talking about more than 1 million refugees. What are the major challenges for integration that come when there's a big population of refugees coming in? And what are the key areas where you think policies can be developed to have like a robust integration of refugees?
A very difficult question, actually, because compared to the Indian story, of course, the numbers are much lesser there. We have literally 1.2 million Rohingyas in Bangladesh. They've been hosted, and honestly speaking, I mean, governments are justifiably worried about economic security, about social security, and of course, political consequences. Because ever since August 2017, the Rohingyas have come in and Bangladesh has welcomed them. But, our resources are also very limited. So while I must also go back, I mean, there were a few lines from W.H. Auden's, one of his poems. And there, Auden writes that the consul banged a table and said, "If you have no passport, you're officially dead. But we are still alive, my dear, but we are still alive." You see, so survival and being refugees in a land where you are not being able to get integrated with the main population is a serious crisis. Unfortunately, the 1.2 million Rohingyas, and of course, they are going up by at least 30,000 a year. So the bilateral discussion, especially the diplomatic discussion on repatriation, has not been a success. I mean, we just saw the United States of America taking in only 68 Rohingyas a couple of months back. So everything said and done, we are not at the best place. And while we talk about the human appeal, while we appeal to humanity, it's also true that the host community also feels burdened. But what Bangladesh is possibly missing out on is, once again, drawing from the talent pool of the refugee community, which we could have done. Of course, there's skills involved, training involved, but we could have done that. What we're also currently missing out on is a huge opportunity for at least forming a special economic zone for them. If we did this, then, yes, we are duty-free to the EU, and now, of course, to United Kingdom, but there's a huge potential with the United States of America, and we could plead duty-free arrangements, at least for that particular zone. So my personal appeal to the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh was, I said, why can't we do a special economic zone? And she said, we could do it, but only in Bhasanchar, in the tiny little space, and not in Cox's Bazar. So while we appreciate and understand the limitations of the government to do the right thing, it also pains us because without education, I don't know where this community is going to go to. And what we at the Asian University for Women do is we host very few women, hardly 244 women out of so many. And that too, we've literally smuggled in through UNHCR. And we are not allowed to even say this. So there's a lot of trepidation around recruiting Rohingya students into the community. But, and they also live in fear. Many of them love wearing chandons, I don't know what you call them, but chandons on their faces. The sandalwood, right. So sandalwood, they love it. But, when they go out on the streets, the special branch or the police are just going to detect them and say, they're Rohingyas. So the identity, the pangs of being identified as a refugee community and not being able to be integrated with the host community is in itself a very big tragedy. And we don't know how to face it at all because very honestly, the ideal thing for them would be to, of course, go back to their homes, but provided there's any home there. So the other options would be resettling them into friendlier spaces, integration, of course, spotting natural talents, setting up special economic zone. And that's at the max that we can go for right now, because the situation is very combustible. And I don't think anybody can actually contain it at this point of time. So we're lucky enough to be joined by a few of our students who have been displaced. One from, of course, the Rohingya community, one from Afghanistan, and another from Syria. I hope all three of them have joined. I really haven't checked yet. But it is tragic. But at the same time, if we can draw strength from our limitations and give back to the host community, maybe that'll be a way forward. Thank you.
Poongkothai, I want to come to the question of identity that Rubana raised, right? A simple thing like having to hide your identity as a refugee while you're trying to integrate, and I'd rather not say assimilate, in the host nation. Is that something, despite of having the opportunities, despite of having accessibility to educational institutions, or is that something that you've noticed in the refugee community who live in India, who don't feel welcomed by, let's say, not just the governments or the policies around it, but by the local communities? Do they feel like they don't want to be seen as a burden, and so they want to kind of hide their identity, or you have noticed something totally different in India?
It's a difficult question because I think it's different for different refugees have different experiences. But, I remember this one incident where we had a competition for the children to draw, right? And they were children between the age of 5 to the age of 15. And we gave them topics my life so far, And there was this one child, and I'll never forget it. He drew himself in a cage, a refugee boy. And, so we met these students and we spoke to them and we asked him, why did you draw yourself in a cage? That is a very, my life so far, and you draw yourself in a cage. And he said, he told us how, when, he feels like, people call him Azadi Payan, which is not even Azadi Payan, but Azadi Nai, like refugee dog. When not that, it's like in school, children can be very mean sometimes. So, when they want to find fault with you or sort of say something about you, then they will pick on you on that aspect of it. So there's always, this thing of you are a refugee at the end of the day. And how much ever, we are welcome because we are Tamils, but there is always that, that little pain of being a refugee, of living a life of sort of, it's not, you're waiting for your life to begin, right? It's sort of, you're in between. So I always call it like waiting in hope, because you're waiting in hope to go home, to, start your life. So, yeah, I hope I answered you. So,
the question to this is, and anyone who wants to answer, whether it's Rubana or Poongkothai, should there be policies in place to sensitize the host communities? Should there be awareness programs, sensitization programs in host communities that kind of break the stigma around refugees, that make the refugees more welcome? And this is just at a very basic level of building awareness and sensitization within the host communities. The policies of education, the policies of economic, of livelihoods can come in later. But have we noticed any kind of sensitization within host communities? Is this something that should be a requirement?
I think I will, I think Rubana should answer that as a educator.
So, Bangladesh did try incentivizing the host community at one point. But it's not about just sensitizing. It's also about practical problems. Resources are drying up for Rohingya communities. Even WFP has cut down on the food ration thing. So it's not as if just incentivizing the host community would be enough, or running awareness programs would be enough, because it won't be. Where is the resource going to come from? So once again, it comes to the point of, who's going to be ensuring the daily bread of the host community? And unfortunately, when resources are limited, empathy also runs really at a very low level. So automatically, the sensitization happens when the government or the policymakers feel that it's absolutely important to have this integration. It won't happen when the government is actually hoping for repatriation. So with repatriation in the agenda, and with the very forceful bilateral conversations going on, in spite of their, very weak grounds and failures, even then, the target is not integration. The target is not being generous to the refugee community. The target is to make them go back or have them resettle somewhere else. So it's difficult. Simple awareness building in Bangladesh won't work.
Is that the same thing in Poongkothai for Sri Lankans? Are they at a point where they want to go back, or is resettlement or integrating into their host nations is what is the way forward for them?
So, I think you have the older generation who definitely wants to go home because, most importantly, they have lands there. Many of them have lands there. Of course, you have, the younger generation who have never, they were born in a refugee camp. They've never seen Sri Lanka, right? Most of the parents came, the biggest influx was in 1990. So there is a lot of fear, they've only heard all these terrible things all of you must have heard about, the kind of war crimes and all of that happened during the end of the war. So there's a lot of fear, but we have been working with them and helping them to kind of, come to terms with that and look at return, just because it's a little bit of a complicated process to get citizenship. India has more than, 6 bodies of refugees. It's a very large number. It already has a very large population, so, citizenship is something that is thrown up, but it still hasn't come to any kind of, anything for our refugees, especially for Tibetans, for Sri Lankans, etc. So right now, the avenue open to us is return. And there is peace in our country. And of course, right now, there's a little bit of an economic upheaval, which is why there's, the return has slowed down. But otherwise, we have had quite a bit of movement of refugees going home, because there they can finally get citizenship and then they can restart their lives as, full citizens. I just want to make one little point. I have never voted. I'm quite old. I've never voted, right? And then I was saying this, and then I was talking to some of my other colleagues in our organization, Phelan Refugee Rehabilitation, and I remember Mr. Patmanathan. He's again, older person, and we haven't voted because, I can't vote in India, so it's these little things, so.
And I just want to for the audience who are present here and who are listening to this conversation, I also want to bring attention to the other refugee communities who live in India as well. The Sri Lankan refugee community for sure, but there are the Afghans in India, there are the Rohingyas in India, just about 20,000 Rohingya, not as many as, I'm sorry, the sound of rain probably is kind of coming in. It's raining really hard here. In case my audio is disturbed, that's the reason. And I think the challenges that different refugee communities in India face are different. So the Sri Lankan refugees may face different kinds of challenges, whereas the Rohingya communities face different kind of challenges. On that note, I want to bring, and again, Rubana and Poongkothai, whoever wants to take this, the role of local governments, but also the national government, the local government, the national government in kind of integrating refugees. For example, the Sri Lankans have come into Tamil Nadu, where they have been very, very, as Poongkothai said, have been welcomed. India on a national level does not have a Ministry of Refugee. But in Tamil Nadu, in the state of Tamil Nadu, there is a ministry that looks into refugee issues particularly. How much do politics and how much do local politics play a role in integrating or help with integration of refugees in the host communities? Any one of you who want to go with this?
For us, it's not even an option because everything's very centralized. Nothing is decentralized. So the government decides, the central government, I mean, basically, there's only one government, which decides, what to do. So, somebody from Cox's Bazar locally would not be able to have any sway over policymakers on this. So it's only about the government and the parliament, which decide on what's going to happen. So it's different in India. So you may ask her the other question. But as far as we're concerned, everything's decided centrally.
But do you think if it was not in the state of Tamil Nadu and if it would have been in a different state, there would have been bigger challenges for the Sri Lankan refugee community in India? And how has living or, being, getting educational access or livelihood access in India while living in Tamil Nadu been helpful? Can you just talk a little bit about the role of local politics and local governance in this?
Sure. So I think, this is actually something that I think is a very relevant question, Priyali, when it comes to India, because we have so many groups of refugees and state governments can actually do a lot. Right. And case in point, Tamil Nadu. So basically, just to give you a quick understanding, yes, it is a central subject, but the money is then spent by the state government and then reclaimed from the center. Any state government that's how it works for refugees, right? So when it comes to, say, the repair of the refugee camps, again, I'm talking about whether it's Tibetan, whether it's Rohingya, wherever, whichever state in India. But however, it takes 3 years for this refund process to take place. And therefore, so what the Tamil Nadu government did was at one point when it had given rice and the Indian government was not sort of, returning that money, then Tamil Nadu decided, okay, you know what, we are going to spend our own state government money to augment what is already given by the center. So at this point, this was first Mrs. Jayalalitha, the former chief minister, did this at one point. And recently, I think many of you may have seen on the news, our current chief minister, the Honorable Mr. Stalin, he has actually announced a huge package of more than 317 crores for refugees. And he is now building houses for the refugee. I mean, when I say houses, it's in the refugee camp, but, they had 10 by 10 thatch roof dwellings. And so now he is augmenting that. Then again, the government gives refugees a dole. So what the center was giving, the state government was then augmenting again. So I think, it's wonderful to see when a state government sort of takes that onus upon itself and it also kind of, pushes the center, right? When the state government is doing, then the center has to do. So then the center also does its bit. And I think it's something that I hope other state governments can possibly do for their, because for us, I think the largest amount of refugees we have in Tamil Nadu is Sri Lankan. But if I am not mistaken, I think the Tibetan refugees are mostly in Karnataka, right? So it's, I think, this can be a model that can be sort of followed by other governments. Definitely a state government can, put aside money from its own state budget to augment what the center is already doing and therefore make refugees more comfortable.
Rubana, just to talk about the role of, the international responsibilities, the responsibilities of the bigger countries, the Western powers, the United States in this case. Do you think there needs to be more international focus or international support when it comes to countries like Bangladesh, which are hosting a massive population of refugees, to enable them to integrate these refugees into their countries, to provide them education, provide them livelihood? Because the resources, India, Bangladesh, South Asian countries are big populous countries. And while we talk about human capital as a resource, we're talking about these countries which already are struggling with their own populations. So do we need a lot more international support, a lot more international attention on these refugee communities to help with this process? Or is resettlement which rarely happens. It's just like a 1% resettlement, which usually happens. Is resettlement the only solution?
Thank you, Priyali, for the question. Now, international community stays engaged only to a point where the issue is making headlines repeatedly. You see, the focus shifts every time. From the Rohingyas, the focus then shifted to the Afghans and their troubles and tribulations after the Taliban government took over, and now it's Ukraine. So the basic the basic landscape of conflict always literally dictates the attention of the international organizations. Like I said, WFP has cut down on their food allocation ration. I think it's $8 now. So international community also, the support from them often dries up. And in the case of Rohingyas, everybody is engaged, but then again, not so much. UNHCR is heavily engaged, but at the same time, in terms of funding, it's drying up. So what's going to happen next? Unfortunately, we, as South Asian nations, if SAARC were to really work out, it would have been wonderful, but regional integration is also at its lowest. I mean, I'm feeling kind of embarrassed to say this, but India's role in also handling Bangladesh's current refugee crisis was pretty unexpected. But it is what it is. I mean, countries pick and choose their alliances, countries pick and choose the borders they want to be friends with, and we have no control over that. So small nations like ours, emerging markets perhaps, but we have so many people there with limited resources. So it becomes literally almost a game or an issue in isolation where we can literally turn to almost no one.
So as somebody who works and who looks at this issue closely and, is in the space of international education, and Poongkothai, you who've been working, you as a refugee yourself and who've been working with other refugee communities, what is the advocacy point here? When we talk about better integration of refugees in host communities, or host communities, being able to be in a position, like why just put the blame on the host communities? Also, the host communities being in a position, in a good position to help with the integration. What are the few advocacy points that should be, taken forward?
I think one point that the host community must consider is, I think the question of identity is very critical. In Bangladesh, the Rohingyas cannot actually learn the language. They're taught, even in schools, in Burmese. So without language, how do you identify yourself with the host community? So that's the first bar, that there is. So I think the only way to overcome this would be to just offer unrestricted quality education to the community. Because just imagine if we could offer just coding to the primary schoolers in the refugee camps, that would change the scenario. I mean, just instantly. So, because they would automatically be desired by everyone else. So, their skills, I mean, why should they be, while they seek refuge, while they are subjected to a lot of humiliation and indignation, why would they be restricted in terms of education? That is their basic right. So if not anything, even if we cannot make them engage in separate economic activity, if we cannot allow them to have their own special economic zones, which will actually benefit Bangladesh actually, then why don't we at least give them better education, quality education to be picked and selected by anyone else all across the globe? I mean, people could pick and pitch for Rohingya talents, if we could basically give them the basic background to be upskilled. So my pitch would be for upskilling through education.
It's a great point. Unrestricted quality education for the community, Poongkothai.
So what I was saying is that, I agree with Rubana that, in our Sri Lankan Tamil refugee community is an example of exactly what she said, right? Which is that because we were ethnically Tamil and, the government schools provide education in Tamil, our children were able to benefit from, education. And then we were given free seats in the colleges, and therefore we have graduates. So I think that's, if that was followed by other, communities and countries embracing refugees, that would be great. Second point, again, as she said, skilling. I think that's very important, providing skilling. But even more important than that, I think there's another point that needs to be brought up, which is, like documentation, right? So I feel like, just from working with refugees for 20 years, one of the hardest things for the refugee was that in India, you are just given a refugee card, right? And so your only identification is that refugee card. So you are refugee number 00 whatever. This makes it very difficult, because when you try to apply for, even to open a bank account, and I have heard that this is a problem that the Rohingyas are facing especially in India. They're not able to open bank accounts. Even when you want to go to school and you want to get admission in a school, you need some kind of a, documentation. And this concept of refugee identity card is not known to anybody. So when you go with this identity card, they don't know what this is, and they're not willing to accept it. So I feel that as residents, even the Tibetans, they've all been here for, like more than 20, 30 years as refugees, the Sri Lankans, many other groups of refugees, the Burmese refugees, they've been here for, so many years. So if we could be also given access to the Aadhaar card as residents, right? This does not mean that you are a citizen, because Aadhaar card is basically, it's not citizenship, it's just residency. Show proof. And this would allow them to then, things like they can't get loans. They, if they want to buy like a scooter or a bike or, anything, they can't get education loans. So as a result, one of the biggest problems that the refugee communities are facing is, for example, these pawnbrokers who go in and then, they all get into this sort of a loan trap, because they have, they can't get any kind of formal, education loans, any kind of, medical loans. They can't get health insurance. So there's all of these issues that I think is something which needs to be addressed. Other than, as Rubana said, education, upskilling, all of that. But if we could give them some kind of documentation other than the refugee card, that would be of great value.
Yeah, so I think the 4 key things that I'm hearing from you all as part of the key advocacy points, so the key checklist that should be part of any kind of host nation when they have a refugee community, is one which is unrestricted quality education for the refugee community. This should include knowledge of the language for the children, so that they are able to integrate and learn quickly and in a better fashion. Upskilling for the community, different generations, and of course documentation and identity cards, because that makes a lot of avenues accessible, even banking system.